Well, good morning, everybody. Man, I had a dream. I got to tell you about this dream. It was the craziest thing. So I dreamed, in my dream, it was August of 2020. And in my dream, I had stepped out of pastoring at DEC. And they brought this guy from like Wisconsin or Ohio or somewhere take my place. This is where the dream gets really sketchy. He was wearing like a Cleveland Browns shirt, as if they had fans or something. And then I left, and shortly thereafter, this virus from China kind of came across the pond, and pretty soon everybody was kind of like hiding out in their houses, and then later they were wearing these funny masks wherever they went. And then I woke up. It wasn't a dream, was it? Yeah, these last few months have been, I guess the word interesting is a good word, but it doesn't capture what's really going on, does it? It's been, when I think back of what this time has been like, the plan that was supposed to be and the plan that never happened. It was last year, the elders and I, we had walked through, here's how you do a pastoral transition. End of January, Kathy and I took off. We were going to be like gone for a few months, visit churches, see what kind of ministries out there, maybe see if God would lead me into something else. And we went to the West for a vacation. We were in Prescott, Arizona when everything really started to go crazy. My kids were going nuts back here. Mom, Dad, you guys don't take this seriously. You're all going to be dead. Get back here. So, I'm looking at the Grand Canyon going, if I die, that's all right. So we ended up calling up JetBlue saying, hey, can we leave a couple days early? Because I think we were actually starting to get worried that they were going to shut down air travel and we were going to be stuck in Arizona forever. So we drove down to Phoenix, to Skyhaven Airport, walked in, there's nobody. And I mean nobody there. Right up to the front to the counter, give them our bags, go to TSA, walk right through there, get on the plane, come home. It's like weird. A couple days later, Dan and I get together and he said, hey, can you help me out with something? Let's do a little video. People are getting really nervous and scared about this. Let's try to, just give a little piece to the sheep. And I can still remember sitting in Dan's office talking with him about this, and those words that come out of your mouth, and now you look back on them and you just shake your head. I said to him, Dan, if this goes on all the way to Easter, I'm going to be heartbroken. Yeah, it went a little bit past Easter now, hasn't it? Months later, I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, but at least me, I can't talk for you, at least me, it has taught me that delusion sometimes I have that I control tomorrow or I control what's going to happen soon is just totally stripped away from you. If you're a person that kind of likes that, I know where I'm going and I know what's happening, man, this is not your time, is it? This is like anxiety time if you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I look at my path and I've been thinking, Lord, this has been really hard. I've had to pray a lot about this as far as what do you do in a world where you're watching, like, I look at my kids, are they going to be employed next week? Just so many things that come down to it. And it seems like there's this question that just haunts me at this kind of time, right? The question is, where's your trust? And where's your hope? See, I think as you step back from it, it's very easy to talk about faith and trust in God when there's nothing that makes you trust. But man, take that away and start letting the future be very sketchy, and all of a sudden you're going to realize whether or not your soul is a soul that has great trust in God or it trusts in other things. See, today what I wanted to do, because I do think that is such an incredibly important thing for us to settle in our souls, is as we look to the future, what are we going to trust in, and where is our hope going to be? I want to take you back into a time when the nation of Israel was going through a really hard thing, and they faced some of the same kind of questions we're facing now, and they answered them dead wrong. In fact, they answered them so wrong it was pathetic, but I want to bring them out as an example to say, when you get to that position in life where you don't know what tomorrow brings and you're kind of scared of what tomorrow brings, do you know what to do about that? They didn't, and it cost them dearly. So let's turn back to the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 2. And I'm going to tell you about a time when two really horrible people led Israel into a very horrible place, and they suffered greatly for it. 1 Samuel chapter 2 is on page 421 if you're using the Bibles under the seats, and it's going to be the story, I call this the story of degradation. It's the story this nation is in real trouble. And one of the reasons they're in real trouble is they have real loser leaders, two of them named Hophni and Phinehas. Let's hear their story, okay? Starts in verse 12. 1 Samuel 2, verse 12. We're going to read to 17. Skip down a couple verses and pick it up again in 22. Eli's sons were wicked men. They had no regard for the Lord. Now, it was the practice of the priests and the people that whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, and while the meat was being boiled, the servant of the priest would come with a three-pronged fork in his hand. He would plunge it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself whatever the fork brought up. This is how they treated all the Israelites who came to Shiloh. But even before the fat was burned, the servant of the priest would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, "Give the priest some of that meat to roast. He won't accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." If the man said to him, "Let the fat be burned up first, and then take whatever you want," the servant would say, "No, hand it over, and if you don't, I'll take it by force." This sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight, for they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. Verse 22. Now Eli, he's old, was very old, and he heard everything his sons were doing to all of Israel and how they slept with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, it's not a good report what I hear spreading among God's people. If a man sins against another man, God may mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him?" His sons, however, did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. Amen. It's a happy little verse to end with, isn't it? Yeah. So here's the thing. Let me set some context here because this will help. You're stepping into a time of transition in Israel. When you say, what was Israel like in the early days, the days of Joshua, the days of Judges? Well, in those days, God had never wanted them to have one leader. It was never the will of God they have a king or whatever you want to call him. The whole point was Israel was made up of 12 tribes. Every tribe had its own leadership. And every one of those tribes was going to be responsible together and apart to come to God, who is their king. That was the idea. God didn't want a king because he knew the second you got a king, God was going to, in the minds of the people, get demoted, whether they say it out loud or not. So through the days of Judges, the days of Joshua, the tribes took care of all the kind of religious duties and the spiritual things that were needed and the governance. But it didn't go that well. In fact, the book of Judges ends with two of the grossest stories anywhere in the Bible, followed by the line, "In those days Israel had no king, and people did just as they saw fit." So in the early part of Samuel, you start seeing this transition away from a 12-tribe-led thing to, pretty quickly here, they're going to get a king. But before that happens, you take a look at, well, where are they spiritually? The answer is nowhere good. Israel is in a place of incredible degradation. The head spiritual guy for the country is Eli the Priest. He has two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Those are two names most Christians don't name their sons. Hophni and Phinehas. In fact, when the story opens, did you see that first line? It said Eli's sons were wicked men. Do you know what that literally says in Hebrew? Eli's sons were sons of the devil. Sons of Belial. That's who they were. They were awful people. And what were they doing? Well, they were making a total mockery of the worship of Israel. God had set up a very clear sacrificial system that would teach the people of Israel how serious sin was, will teach them how forgiveness is going to come through the shedding of blood, was going to teach them that the holiness of God is not something you step on. He takes it really seriously. So here's Hophni and Phinehas. They're serving as priests. The center of worship at this point is not yet up in Jerusalem. It's in Shiloh, just north of Jerusalem. They've set the tabernacle up there, and these guys are just having a party. When people come with sacrifices, notice how he said they had this big three-pronged fork. They're just jabbing that thing. Probably if they came up with nothing, they'd jab it again. They're pulling up all the meat they want. They're stealing the sacrifices from people, saying some of the sacrifices were supposed to be totally burned up. And they're like, no, we want the prime rib part. Give that to us. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to beat you up. They took the worship of God in the sacrificial system and they just made a mockery of it. They didn't know the Lord. It's the weirdest thing to think about it. In that tent was the Ark of the Covenant, that box that was covered with gold. And inside of it had the law, the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. It had Aaron's rod that budded. It had manna. It was like this place where in a very special way was God's presence. Two big cherubim on the outside. The picture is God sitting on his throne with this mercy seat underneath him that keeps the law from judging people because he's atoned for them. In that tabernacle was a visual representation of the holiness of God, and Hophni and Phinehas treated it with contempt. And don't ever think it was just them. Boy, when your leaders go south on you, it affects everybody. You got to think that this degradation of the worship of Israel has permeated the place. Not only are they making a mockery of the sacrificial system, they've turned the tabernacle into their own little mini brothel. You know, when it says Eli found out that Hophni and Phinehas were basically playing around with the women who were assigned to work in the temple. I mean, think about this for a minute. This is the place of holiness of God, and it's been turned into just awful. Yep, they didn't really believe in the God of the ark, did they? Well, it's going to catch up with them, because what you're going to do is you're going to see how this time goes from the degradation of Israel as a religious community to the desperation of when they need God. Let's flip over to chapter 4. Chapter 4, beginning in 1b. Now the Israelites went out to fight against Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. And the Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat upon us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that it may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemy." So the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the ark of the covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the Lord's covenant came into the camp, all Israel raised such a great shout that the ground shook. Hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," we're in trouble. Nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? They're the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the desert. Be strong, Philistines, be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews, as they have been subject to you. Be men and fight. This, like I say, you go from a time of just degradation to a time of desperation. And in this time of desperation, these two foes, these guys have been going at it. The Philistines and Israel went to war against each other for at least 200 years. I mean, it was just like baseball season. When the spring came, get the troops out and start going after each other. We don't even know, it doesn't even tell you here, does it, who started this conflict. It just says, now the Israelites went out to fight the Philistines. We don't even know why. Just part of life back then. Samson had to deal with Philistines. Shamgar in the book of Judges. David would be dealing with Philistines. For 200 years, these were their mortal enemies. And they went out to battle, and the battle didn't go well. 4,000 of them died. And this is where it gets really interesting. They asked the right question, didn't they? The question they asked was, why did the Lord bring defeat upon us today before the Philistines? See, the Philistines were different than other, like the Ammonites and the Moabites. Those people kind of stayed in their own little world. They would venture into Israel. They'd beat each other up and they'd go home. The Philistines were expansionists. They came from Phoenicia. They would live in what today we would call Gaza and Tel Aviv area. But they wanted to push in and take this place over. And when the Israelites got beat up, they asked the right question. Why did the Lord bring defeat upon us today before the Philistines? Do you realize that's a question that has kind of evaporated from our world today? I mean, when you look at the history of the United States and some of the leaders we've had, Abraham Lincoln, probably more than any other president, was right up front saying, the reason we're going through the travails we're going through is the stench of this thing called slavery, and God's not going to put up with it anymore. I don't know what would happen today if any president, any senator, any governor said, hey, gang, why has this virus spread all through our land? Maybe God's trying to get our attention, so maybe we should declare a week of fasting and prayer. Can you imagine? That'd be the last time they got elected in office, I bet. And yet, there's not always answers. I mean, some of the times you go and there's no answer that God's definitely saying, yeah, I'm doing this to get your attention. Sometimes it's you live in a broken world, and some God allows the brokenness just to whack you. It happens. You don't always know. But today we don't even ask that. The Israelites asked the question. You know what the problem was? They didn't wait for the answer. They asked the question, great question, why did God let 4,000 of us die today? They should have waited for an answer. They should have got one of the prophets or Samuel, he was still pretty young at this point, to come in and say, why are the Philistines beating us up? Instead of waiting for an answer, they came up with a solution. What was their solution? Let's get the box, the magic box, the Ark of the Covenant. Why did they get it? I'm not totally sure, but I wonder if it's kind of they remembered in the days of Joshua, they walked that thing around Jericho 7 times and the walls fell down. Maybe that's what they were thinking. If we can just get the box, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, if we can just get that here, the magic powers that come out of that thing will help us win. And the idea that who brought it to them was Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of the devil, not a good thing. So they bring the ark out there. I gotta give the Philistines credit. Israel goes crazy. The ark has showed up. Hey, we got the ark. We're going to win. They're screaming and yelling, and the Philistines say, what's up with that gang? And when they find out the ark's there, they're terrified. We've heard about these gods. So you got to remember, you're in a time where people's beliefs was that every god had a little domain that they had power over. The God of Egypt didn't really have power up in Israel. The God of Israel didn't have power in Egypt. But when the God of Israel was brought right into the Philistines' area, they were terrified. They'd heard the stories about what God did to Egypt. They knew the stories of the Girgashites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Amorites. They knew what Israel's history was. And I got to give them credit. They didn't run. They didn't run. Even though they're terrified and even though they're saying, who can stand against these gods? They end up saying, let's fight or we will be their slaves. Well, how does it go when your team has the magic box? Doesn't go well. Take a look. Verse 10. You're going to go from to the degradation, to the desperation, to the defeat. This is a DDD sermon. So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers, and the ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. You know, Israel's going to have to learn a really, really hard lesson that day. They brought the ark out thinking, this thing's got power. When we've got the ark, we're going to beat the Philistines. They went off to battle, and they got annihilated. The Philistines wiped out 34,000 of them. And you look at that story, and you scratch your head and say, Lord, what's the point of this story? Because I think the point of this story has a lot to do with where you and I are living today and what we're going through. See, the point of the story is that the people of Israel, and Hophni and Phinehas especially, they believed in the ark of God. And they believed in the power of the ark of God. You know what they didn't believe in? The God of the ark. They got it upside down. They had the belief that there was some magical power in the box at the same time as the way they were acting and how they were disobeying God was just bringing out holy anger from him. Once again, they believed in the ark of God. They just didn't believe in the God of the ark. They got it totally backwards. And because of that, they went off into battle and got annihilated. God was not with them. That box has no power if the God of the box isn't there. That's a hard lesson to learn. If you want to read the next few chapters, they're some of the funniest in the Bible, what happens when the Philistines get their hands on this thing. But you know, for us, there's a question that rolls out of this, isn't there? I think for every one of us in this room, trying to figure out how you make your way through a pandemic, whatever, as my wife calls it, the election infection. Yeah, I love that term. Because she's absolutely convinced the day after the election you won't hear about this again, no matter who wins. Who knows? She could be right. But here's the thing. Every one of us here, as we're walking through this, like I've said, the defining mark of these last few months for me has been how many times a discussion ends with the words, that doesn't make sense, because that's kind of where we're at most of the time. And in a world that doesn't make sense, and in a world that gets a little bit full of anxiety, in a world that's a little scary, what do we trust in? See, I think the problem sometimes is we're not that different from the Israelites. We trust in the box, but not the God of the box. And our boxes are different, aren't they? What's your box? You know, I meet people who, you know what their box is? Their box is science. I actually know folks who said, I'm not coming out of quarantine until there's a vaccine. Okay. What if there never is one? Haven't found one for the common cold yet. What if this eludes the scientists? Are you really going to stay in seclusion till you're dead? Some people, their whole hope is that somebody somewhere in a lab is going to fix this. I mean, God bless them if they do. but I'm not sure that's where you want your trust. Some people, where their trust is in their bank accounts because they're sitting okay and they know that if their company fails or they have to shut down, they're all right. So their trust is in the almighty dollar, which often will let you down. For many people, their trust is in politics, right? And let's be honest, we're in the most politically weird era of our existence, I think. There are people that really think, depending on who you vote into office, somehow they're going to stop the virus. Good luck with that. In fact, I heard somebody say, what has happened to America that when a trauma hits it, that the first response is trying to figure out who you can blame? A virus comes, people start to die, and you point the finger, it's the Chinese, the Republicans point the finger at the Democrats, at the Republicans, and it's like, is this really helpful at this point in time when a virus is rolling through our people to try to blame folks for it? I don't know how many viruses are blamable. But some people, their whole hope is that come November, we're going to elect the right people in the state and the national, and then everything will be good. Good luck with that. And then finally, I hope I don't offend anybody here, but I might, because this is my own little mini pet peeve, and I don't know why it is, but it is. Some people put their faith in what I would call trite slogans that drive me nuts. I'm honest, when I drive through a town and I see people with a sign up saying, "Don't worry, we're all in this together," I don't react well to that. And I'm not sure what's wrong with me. It's like a nice little thing. But I just want to pull in. I want to find 10 of those places and just pull in, knock on the door, and say, I love that sentiment. And so what I think you should do is write me a check for 10 grand. And I'll get those other 9 people in your neighborhood that have to write me a check for 10 grand. And we'll take the $100,000 and we'll give it to Kenny Young and see if we can get Young's restaurant opened again, okay? Since we're all in this together. If you're going to put up a sign like that, and if you did, live up to it. Because that I look at it and I go, it sounds nice, but are you actually really doing what that sign says? I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a cynic. But I'm just watching as we're encountering these things, watching, where are we putting our trust? Politics, science, but what about the God of science and the God of all resources and the God of all that is good? Is he the one leading the way? I know in my own life, I get real personal here, it's been a test of my soul to see how much faith I actually have. I've sat many a day out at the lake early in the morning with the Bible open going, Lord, how come my soul is anxious? How come I'm worried? I shouldn't be. And it's that moment where you realize that you get down on your knees and you say to God, God, I'm not the guy of faith I want to be. And I shouldn't be scared because I know enough to know you're in control of this thing. And you start going through that wonderful practice of confession and repentance and faith. And along the way, you know where God will meet you? He'll meet you with answers you didn't even know were coming. Here's a funny one. As about 2 weeks ago, like out of the blue, because I'm wondering, what am I going to do with life? I'm not the kind of person that can just sit around. I get this call from PCA, and they said, hey, our Bible teacher at the high school stepped down. Would you be interested? And so starting next week, I'll be teaching Bible at high school. I don't know if that's good or not. I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah, well, wait. It's going to be Bueller. For those of you who know the movie, I don't know, but I was like, I did not go looking for that. It came to me. And then all of a sudden, God surrounded me with people, mostly my wife, going, oh, you need to do that. I think she wants me out of the house is the issue. But, I mean, we had all September planned. We were supposed to be in Wyoming, hiking and fishing and going to Glacier, down to the Arches. That went away. But it was one of those moments of, God, I didn't pursue this, but you just dropped it in my lap. And in a couple of months, we'll know whether that was a blessing or not, won't we? We'll see. But I was sitting there just the other day. I have a Thursday mornings men's group that's been studying the book of Hebrews. And we were in chapter 13, and I came to this verse. This is how God meets you when you're in the Word. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I won't be afraid. What can man do to me? You take a truth like that and let God implant it in your soul every day. And you can be pretty confident that you're not a believer in the box of God. You're a believer in the God of the box. Friends, I don't know what tomorrow brings. Dan said it so well. You know, the leaders of this church are making incredibly good decisions. Bless them, pray for them. The number of times Kathy said to me, aren't you glad you don't have to make that one? I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I am. But we're in a place right now for all of us to answer that question. Do you believe in the God of the ark, or do you just believe in the ark of God? Let's go for the God of the ark. Let's rise and pray. Father in heaven, thank you for letting us gather here today. You know, as Pastor Dan said, the inconveniences of some of the things that hit us, that's what they are. They're inconvenient. God, your saints have gathered at the risk of their lives. Your saints have been, they've given up life for the witness of Jesus Christ. So far, we haven't been asked to do those kind of extreme things, but it could come. But Lord, in the middle of all of this, can we keep our eyes on the heavens from where our help comes from? And can we truly believe, as the writer of Hebrews said, to say with confidence, the Lord will never leave me or forsake me. He's my help in times of trouble. Thank you for that, Lord. Now let us lift up our voices and let the praise of Jesus Christ ring through the heavens. In his holy and precious name we pray.